Welcome to everyone, to all the friends and yoga enthusiasts who are joining us from the Dominican Republic and from India on the occasion of the 8th International Yoga Day. We are live from New Delhi early in the morning and ready to listen to the conference of Dr. Anuradha Choudry titled Yogitude, the Attitude of the Yogi. As an introduction to this program, I will just say that today I am very happy, not only because I have practiced yoga in the International Yoga Day and taken part in the celebration, but also for the following reasons I would like to share. First of all, I am extremely happy that the Dominican Republic Embassy in India is associated with the celebration of the International Yoga Day and is contributing to this event with the presence of a distinguished scholar from India. We have shared with you the CV of Dr. Anuradha Choudry, as well as one of her articles. So I will just add what you will see during her presentation. Anuradha is not only an extremely learned person, she has also a very special and inspiring personality. The second reason to be happy today is because we're doing this online program with a reputed specialist on yoga and Indian spirituality for the second year in a row. I like the idea of continuity, of establishing this online program as a ritual. In 2021, we had with us Dr. Oscar Pujols talking about the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. I hope we can repeat this in 2023. Finally, the fact that we have this year the Indian Embassy in Dominican Republic operating and organizing on the ground the celebration of the 8th International Yoga Day is a blessing that fills me with joy. I have seen wonderful pictures of the many activities conducted in different parts of the country in the past few days. I know that a yoga teacher from India has reached the Dominican Republic and will be sharing his knowledge for a few months in our country. Above all, I know of the commitment of Ambassador Ramu Abagani to spread yoga and the best India has to offer to humanity. Ambassador Abagani wanted to join us this morning. Unfortunately, because of problems with his connection, he has not been able yet to be online.
We had to struggle a bit to get connected, but now I'm here.
Excellent. So you can share your remarks.
First of all, thanks to the yoga teacher. Of course, she's not just teacher, but she's a scholar on various subjects, including yoga, and for kindly accepting to agree your request to speak, share her ideas about attitude, yoga for. I think it is a great initiative, especially to mark the occasion of 8th International Day of Yoga. I'm glad that I could also join and welcome all the participants from both India and Dominican Republic. We just had a very successful International Day of Yoga celebrations in Dominican Republic across the country in various provinces. So it is a very important initiative from your embassy, especially you have been always taking active lead to mark this event in last few years. I think more awareness about the benefit of yoga go to the people, common people. It is better. It is, of course, there is awareness in Dominican Republic. Beyond it is considered as exercise, but really this new concept, I myself is looking forward to hear from her. I'm sure that this will also benefit many people. I hope I shared this information with many yoga organizations here. I hope some of them are joining, and I'm looking forward to the new concept of how yoga can contribute. Thank you so much, David, and all the participants, and especially the teacher who is speaking to us.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and I will for your kind words. And I will just add that the conference will be recorded, and we will be able to share it with all the persons interested that have not been able to join online at this moment. So, Dr. Anuradha Choudry, you have the floor now.
So namaste once again, and thank you very much, Your Excellencies, Ambassador David Puig, as well as Ambassador Ramu Abagani ji, for this wonderful opportunity to connect not just with the International Yoga Day celebrations in our country, in Dominican Republics, and around the world, but also to have this opportunity to try to really connect with oneself in a more conscious manner. And I think the beauty of this day that our Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji, the fact of him introducing this is just that in terms of the world, it's a day when people just connect more with themselves. And this is a very huge kind of an accumulation or coming together of souls who are more enlightened on this. They're just trying to feel more connected within themselves as well as connected with people across the world with a common aspiration. And we hope that these kind of activities will only grow in the years to come. So as very typical to the Indian tradition, I would also like to start with a small invocation, a small prayer, and then I will start with my session. But I'd also like to congratulate Your Excellency, Ambassador David Puig, for being a passionate yoga practitioner, as well as somebody who's very, very fond of Sanskrit, because that's where I first met you. And we have quite a few of our Sanskrit students who've joined. And I'd like to, yes, I hope that someday even this language will play an important bridge to bring different cultures together. So thank you once more. And I just start on with the verse of invocation. This is a verse that is dedicated to Patanjali, who is the founder, writer of the Yoga Sutras. And Patanjali has various kinds of contributions that he makes to cleanse the body, to cleanse the being. So it says, I'll just explain it and then I will chant it out. So it says, Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacham. So basically, he's trying to cleanse the being. So he says, how does he do it? Through yoga, he cleanses the mind. And with the speech, because he's also a grammarian. So through speech, he cleanses through grammar, he cleanses speech. Padena vacha, malam sharirasya tu vaidyakena. Through Ayurveda, because he's also attributed an Ayurveda text as Charaka. So this knowledge helps to clean the body. So there are three parts to ourselves. So as outputs of our being. So there is the mind, there's the speech, and there is the body. And each of these aspects of us has been, we have options of cleansing them through the different knowledge traditions that Sage Patanjali is associated with. So it says, Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacham Malam Sharirasya Tu Vaidyakena Yopa Karottam Pravaram Muninam Patanjalin Pranjalir Anatosmi. So to Maharshi Patanjali, who is the remover of these obstacles, to the remover of the dearths of all these three levels, to him I offer my salutation. To him who is the greatest of sages, to him I say my pranams, my salutations. I'd just like to chant that and continue. Om Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacham Malam Sharirasya Cha Vaidyakena Yopakarottam Pravaram Muninam Patanjalim Pranjaliranatosmi. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So I'd like to just again offer my salutations to Sage Patanjali and hope that the knowledge that he has brought is something that will help to cleanse us uh, individually and collectively, because the highest tool that we have as human beings is our mind. And therefore, the entire yoga tradition is about cleansing the different layers of ourselves. So, when we talk about the attitude of a yogi, we are looking at what we mean to be a yogi initially, and then what is the kind of attitude, what is the kind of worldview that we have when one is a yogi. So I'm going to use a mixed method of trying to convey this, and that mixed method would include inviting you to answer a few questions, try and explore this topic together. I was mentioning to Anaji, who's also been very kind to coordinate this entire program from the beginning, and we've shared some wonderful uh, moments of discussions. So when we talk about yoga, and we are talking about being a yogi, it is important to go into the root of the Sanskrit word yogi itself. So the word yoga firstly comes from the root yuj, which means to unite. And the natural question that comes up is uniting what? Because you understand immediately that there are many things that need to be united. The next important question is unite what with what? So there is another level of connection that is taking place here. And the word yogi itself implies one who is united, not necessarily one who is in the process of being united, but one who is already in the state of union. The verb yuj has another meaning, which is to dissolve. So the question again comes up, dissolve what into what? What are we trying to dissolve into what? So when we talk in this context of yoga and we look at certain definitions that have been mentioned in yoga, so we see that there is the concept of the yoga in this context where we are looking at yoga as uniting different parts of ourselves, uniting. Yoga is a word that is uniting us with something around us, with the highest as well as with something around us. And then there is also this idea of dissolution, as I just mentioned. And the yogi is one who has united the different parts in themselves, as well as has dissolved themselves in something that is much greater. So, what I'd like to do is to help us understand who really we are, and then take this forward when we talk about what does it mean to be a yogi in terms of what is the attitude that one has when one becomes a yogi. So, initially, when this question comes up of identity, because when we say unite what within the individual, the first very easy answer to give this question, answering this question, unite what with what, the obvious question seems to be, let's unite ourselves with everybody around us, because that's an easy thing to see. That's an easy attempt to undertake. That how can I be united with at least the people around me? How can I be united to the environment around me? Do I make this effort to go outwards? Do I make this effort to really step out and connect with people? Is that what yoga is talking about? Or or how can I connect with nature? How can I connect with things around me? Because what I find is when I connect with people at the level of a heart, when I connect with people at the level of the mind, when I connect with people at the level of just coming together in a very genuine spirit, then it creates a kind of an expansion of myself. And when I connect to the nature around me, also, one of the most powerful moments of union that we experience is when we are in nature often. So, this level of connection is something that is quite easy to understand. That when one is in nature, one tends to forget oneself and become one with the vastness of the nature. It could be standing in front of an ocean. It could be standing in front of a beautiful scenery of the forest. It could be standing in terms of a mountain and just feeling the majesty of the mountains. So connecting with nature, connecting with another human being, these are places where we feel there is a kind of an expansion of ourselves, and we feel a certain joy and happiness that comes about. If people have had the opportunity of reading the article on Sukha, we are talking about Sukha as excellent spaces. And that excellent spaces is discussed in one of the texts called the Upanishads, the Chandogya Upanishad. They talk of it as a connection with, or rather, the Sukha is talked about as Yovai Bhuma Tat Sukham, that which is expansive. Any space which is expansive is a space of deep joy, deep bliss or ananda that comes from there. Now, in that case, how is this ananda possible? How can one achieve this ananda? How can one achieve this joy within is a question that all of us are striving to achieve through different activities that we are doing. One of the most flourishing, uh, one aspects of life is that makes us look for happiness. All of us are through different activities trying to seek this happiness. But where does this happiness really lie? And how does happiness connect with yoga? How does that connect with the yogi? Yeah, these are all questions that come up, and I will try in different ways to answer them. So first and foremost, if we try and understand who we are, there's an exercise that I've been doing, and I'd love to take you through that experience. So I'd like you to look at your hands and share with me what is it that you see. So you could use the chat box, you could unmute and reply, but I just observe your hand and tell me what is it that you notice, you observe.
Lots of lines.
Excellent. What else?
And they're zigzag, they're not in order.
All right. Anything else? What do you notice? Is there anything coming up on chat?
I kind of see an impression in the middle of the palm that's down.
All right.
It's not even. It's not even. Yeah.
All right. Yes, there's a shape. There's an undulation that is there. There is lines. There are, what else? Very obvious. What when we're looking at the hand, what do we see?
The union of fingers.
Union of fingers, exactly. So the palm, it holds the fingers together. Excellent. What else? Very obvious. I mean, just
the shape of the fingers.
Shape of the fingers, excellent. What else?
The knuckles.
Knuckles, okay.
And it keeps things together, or everything is, but it keeps things together. Yeah.
All right.
Holds things together.
Okay, okay. And color, we notice the color of our hands. We also notice texture of our hands. Yeah. Now, imagine for some reason you're suddenly made to wear an X-ray lens. What would you notice of your hand? It's as if you're wearing an X-ray thing in front of your eyes. What would you notice?
We would just see bones.
Exactly. You would just see bones, right? And would you see the lines at that stage?
Probably not. Depends on what you're wearing. Probably not.
No, the lines that you notice when you are without your lens, do you when you're not wearing any special lens, will you see them when you wear an X-ray lens? You just have an X-ray vision.
We see what's going on within that hand. That's the bones. Somebody answered here.
Exactly. So you would typically see the bones of the hands. You would see a shape. Of course, we see the shape. Now, supposing you only had an X-ray vision, how would you react with the hand? What would you take care of? What would be your concern?
or the bones staying together.
Excellent. You would be careful that you're not breaking anything, that you're not doing anything, because suddenly if you can see that the pressures that it's taking every time you lift something heavy, you'd be very careful about how much you are being able to lift, or what kind of pressure that you're giving on it in order not to break it, let's say. Now, supposing if you are aware of the infrared lens, which captures heat patterns. Supposing you're changing your lens and you're wearing an infrared vision, what would you see then?
A massive heat, I guess.
Yes, and you would see different colors. You would see blues, greens, reds, depending on the kind of heat pattern that you have. Now, in India, we have this the practice of putting mehendi. You color your hands. So if you had only the X-ray vision or the infrared vision, would you bother to color your hands with beautiful, designs and all? Would it make sense? It would not make sense, right? So what one of the things that emerges from this little exercise so far is that the lens that you're wearing, you're looking at the same object. You've not changed objects, but the lens that you wear changes the way in which you perceive that object itself. You're looking at a different dimension of the same object. And because you change your perception of that object, your behavior towards it will change. Your relationship with it changes. So our perception, it plays a very important role in determining how we deal with the world around us. And therefore, I will take you one step beyond. So what would be, let's say, the perception of a yogi? But let me take you through it. So supposing now you have a very powerful microscope that you can look into your hand. What would you start seeing?
The cells.
Excellent. Even more deeper? It's very powerful. So you go deeper into the cells. What will you see?
The atoms.
Okay. No, just with the palms. We're just at the palm. You go deeper. You're seeing the cells. You go even deeper. Then what do you see? What do you notice when you go even deeper? So there are cells. You focus even into the cells. What will you see?
First, you would see the parts of the cell.
Yes.
And then I guess you would see molecules and then atoms.
Excellent. And if you go into the atom, what do you see?
Quantum particles.
Quantum particles, exactly.
And then just space.
Exactly. So you will see space eventually, and you will see vibrating particles, right? So if you go really, really deep, as far as our instruments have taken us, as far as we understand of the nature of reality, if you go really deep into the hand, we've not gone anywhere else so far. We're just focusing at a different level of this object of the hand. And we're going into the real microcosmic reality of the hand itself, the quantum reality of the hand. And suddenly, will you see your hand when you're there at that quantum level? So I call this the quantum lens. So when you wear the quantum lens, will you see your hand at all? Will you see the light?
No.
No.
You will just see space. Will you see the shape of your hand?
No.
Until now, we were seeing the shape of the hand. With the three lenses I told you, just the normal one, the infrared, as well as the X-ray one, you were still seeing the shape of your hands. But the moment you zoom further into the quantum reality, you do not even see your hand. You only see space, and you see a lot of sizzling, almost like you see a lot of particles, vibrating particles, right? Now, I'd like you to close your eyes, and I'd like you to apply that X-ray vision on yourself. So just close your eyes and suddenly, not the X-ray, the quantum lens, apply that quantum lens on yourself. And what do you see then? What do you see at that level of yourselves?
We would see that there is no separation.
There is no separation.
They're all space.
And there's nothing, right?
Yes. So I'd like you to stay with that experience a little bit. So stay with it. And I'd like you to just for a moment ask yourself this question: who am I? Who really am I? At that level. What comes to your mind? What is your experience? So yes, there is an
Since we see ourselves outside the box, we are watching what's going on inside. So you kind of sense separation of you from that, at least tentatively in those few minutes.
yes, it's very interesting. So there is a concept, I mean, there is an experience of I am. So there is an experience of existence, of being there, because just because we've gone into particles and all doesn't mean that we've disappeared. The shape of the body disappears at that level, but we have an awareness of being. So there is being, there is some being. We cannot define what that is, but there is a conscious recognition of being. Second, there is a awareness of knowing that I am. What Kateri just said, Kateriji just said, that there is an awareness that I am. And lastly, I would like to ask you that when you close your eyes, so do this exercise again. So close your eyes and try and connect to your emotional self. How do you feel in that quantum level of your own reality? What is the feeling that you experience?
Blissed out.
More at peace,
Yes.
I mean, than in the outer world, because of the quietness.
What happens at that level? So coming to this point of Yogitude, imagine you're at that level. Imagine that circumstantially you've got fixed with a lens. What would be your attitude towards the world around you? How would you look at another human being? How would you look at nature? How would you look at people around you? Will you notice, let's say, gender? Will you notice age? Will you notice nationality?
No.
Notice religion?
No.
As we go deeper, we have that sense of oneness. We don't see outside of anybody. It's like you're part and parcel of what's outside. It's that oneness, I guess.
At that level, if you had to deal with somebody else, I mean, imagine that you just become conscious that there are other consciousnesses, and you have to work with somebody else. Because another point is that I'll take you through one more exercise before we come back. All right. Now imagine that you've been spaced out through the quantum lens. I'd like you at that point to also look at yourself as the person you are now. So imagine that you have a shifting lenses. So you have the quantum lens, it shifts back to the lens that you are right now looking at yourself. You shift and you have a quantum lens and you shift back to a normal state. How would it change, or how would it impact your relationship with the world around you?
I guess we would address the world and the people with a lot more compassion and understanding, because we would know that they are us. Like, we would really know it, not just in theory. We would embody it.
Brilliant.
It's like coming out of a dream and how we see the dream and what's our perspective when we were inside and when we come outside. depends, I think, from individual to individual, I think. May not be.
Yes, if there's anybody else also who would like to just share, like, what happens when you're having this alternative lens? Suddenly you're going in and out of a quantum being and you're suddenly come back to normal. Quantum being, normal.
I feel it's like a higher state of consciousness, being able to bring it back to the now, going to that higher level and then coming back and bringing it to the present moment.
Yes. Once you have achieved experience, that was a very nice explanation. So once you have connected to that dimension of reality, what is always important to remember is that each of these realities we spoke of are simultaneously coexisting realities. It's not that one becomes less apparent when another one is there. It just matters in which level we have plugged ourselves in. Are we plugging into the X-ray reality of life? Or like dogs, for example, they only see everything in black and white, I believe. Life would look very different. Or supposing you now plugged into this quantum reality. So we realize that I'm sitting here and talking in front of you, and yes, we are having this exchange. But at another level of being, we are much more connected than we even realize. It doesn't matter which part of the world you are. I'm here, you're there. There's a very different attitude that can emerge when one recognizes, first and foremost, when one just recognizes that we are many layers of selves put together. And when I connect myself only to this reality, supposing you've had this, this opportunity of zooming out or zooming in this context, you've gone into this reality of the quantum world. And then you come back and you hear two people who are talking and saying, that person's a very bad person, this person's a very good person, whatever, that person did that to me, whatever. What would be your perspective on that? How would you tend to regard these as I would say, these kind of interactions between individuals? What would be your attitude when you're encountering two people who are really fighting as if they're completely different human beings? We have a war going on right now. But if somebody just had this quantum lens and you saw maybe these world leaders who think that things are really, really different and apply application of force and whatever, what would be your what would you do at that point? How would you encounter that level of reality?
Well, it would look as if something is fighting itself or arguing with itself, right?
And therefore, what would be your what would be your final kind of a statement on that?
I would say it doesn't have any sense to do that.
Doesn't make any sense to do that, right? So when we talk of this concept of a yogi, we are really talking of somebody who has found the unity of all the layers of their being. They're not stuck with any one lens. The lenses that they use to look at the world starts primarily with this lens of unity consciousness. Now, the big question is that when you achieve this lens of a unity consciousness, it doesn't mean that the individual disappears like we've done. You can go in and out, because the individual, of course, I remain with my body, with my realities, with my limitations. All of that is there. But when we talk of a yogi who is united within and who is connected to what? Connected to this larger, this higher consciousness within, dissolved inward. What happens when you suddenly have this quantum lens? Are you there as a human being, or are you, what really happens to this perception that we have of who we are? Does it remain with its rigid contours, or does it dissolve into a much greater dimension of our own selves? We're not talking of somebody else here. We're talking of a dissolution, of a removing of the boundaries of this limited concept of ourselves. Because the moment we come into this limited boundaries of the concept of ourselves, it's at that time that we start differentiating with others. It's at that time that we start perceiving various kinds of labels that create different kinds of challenges with everybody around us, right? So a lot of important questions emerge about oneself and how one leads one life. How does one treat everybody around ourselves? If we even conceptually acknowledge that I have within myself a potential that is one with the world I live in. And therefore, the question that comes up at this, therefore, is that how can I therefore be connected? How can I therefore find this kind of a unity? And what does it do to me? Does it make me weaker? Does it make me stronger? As some of you said, it does make us more compassionate, because you suddenly realize that, how can you, and this compassionate feeling that we experience is not a forced compassion. I don't have to try to be nice to somebody. One is nice because it doesn't make sense not to be nice. Because there is no other. As Anaju is saying that, yes, at that point it doesn't make sense to be hitting at yourself. I mean, it's as crazy as that. So compassion becomes a natural, a spontaneous experience of being. Joy, just the fact of being and unconditional being gives a natural sense of an expanded bliss. Because you are everything. There's nothing that comes in the way. Important question that emerges: how do we arrive at that? All the different practices that we do in yoga, how do they help us achieve that? And I will take you through two or three different ways of explaining that, but I'll do it my style, because one of the ways of understanding human nature is what we just did through the quantum lens. We realize that at some level we are these vibratory beings. And if you look at ourselves as vibratory beings, I normally present three kinds of models of vibratory beings. So the first kind of model that we can talk about is one where at a physical level, let's say we have vibrations that are very dense. At an emotional level, we have vibrations that are a little less dense. At a mental level, we have vibrations that are a little less dense. And in this question of who am I, that is asked in one of the Upanishads known as Taittiriya Upanishad, there is this young boy who goes to his father and says, what is this absolute truth that is of myself? And the father says, think about it. Who are you really? Think about it. So he goes and meditates on that question, and he says, he comes up with a very obvious level of reality. He says, I am this body. I am this body. And what is this body made of? This body is made of food. So Annamaya Kosha. I am this body of food. What I eat is what I become. And therefore, that is who I am. The father says, excellent. That is one lens that he saw, very obvious lens. He says, excellent. But I'd like you to think about it a little further. So he goes back and thinks about it, and he comes back. He says, I mean, the logic that could be used here is, he says that when I die, the body is there, but I am not there. So what is it that leaves the body when one passes away? And he says, the prana, the life animating aspect of my being, the prana, the chi, this is missing. So I am the prana. So he says pranamaya kosha, because when that is not there, I am not there in the body. So he says, I am that prana that animates everything. The father says, brilliant, but think a little more. He goes further and he thinks and he says that, there are beings who have all the prana in the body and all, but that's not what makes them who they are. They have a mind, they are doing things. So what is it that pushes us to do whatever we are doing? It's the mind. So he says, I am the mind, manomaya kosha. He says, there is the layer of the mind that makes me want to do things, that makes me live, that makes me alive beyond just having prana. The father says, brilliant, but think, push it further. So you see that he's deepening the lenses of perceiving himself. So he says, push it a little further and see what do you arrive at. And then he sees at one level of a higher intelligence, and he says that there are times when I am able to see realities that are not necessarily processed through my logical mind. I know things. I know things because there is a kind of an intuition that tells me about the nature of reality. And so he says, I am the Vijnana Maya Kosha. I am the level of this intuition, this higher intelligence. And then he pushes it further. He says, excellent, you're almost getting there. Think a little further. And then he goes through what this lens that we had just experienced with the quantum lens. And he experiences this blissing out. So he says, I am this Anandamaya Kosha. When he goes really I am the sheath of bliss. And in that state of bliss, I know that I am, and I am, there is an existence, Sat, there is a knowing of existence, Chit, and there is the bliss component of Ananda. So this is a model of somebody who's doing a very clear kind of a deeper investigation of the different layers of themselves. Right. But then we see that at a vibrational level. So if you look at ourselves in this vibrational particular level of Ananda, that sheath of quantum, as we come down, we see that these level of vibrations have different forms of densities, and they are not always this harmonious and smooth. Sometimes these vibrations are like that. They're all interconnected, of course. This layer, fortunately, the intuition layer, because it's connected with higher knowledge, is not really determined by our personalities. Right? So it can be at this level, let's say. And then we have another kind of a internal vibratory atmosphere, which is like that. And immediately you see what is happening. Okay. And then, of course, you have the higher levels that remain always unaffected by the quality of the human being. Because when we are doing this quantum lens and you come back to the human body, the human being that we relate ourselves with, you will see that there is a level of interface and entering into the gross reality of who we are. There is a level when the space is free, and when the space starts becoming condensed into the body and all of that, it starts acquiring different kinds of properties. So these are the three models of internal vibratory atmospheres that an individual can have. And if I had to ask you, of these three, which one will you identify as being the internal atmosphere of a yogi? What would you say? Which of these three for you corresponds to the internal atmosphere, vibratory nature of a yogi? A, B, or C? Anybody? which of these three is more like the internal atmosphere of a yogi? Are these pictures clear? Are these drawings, do they make sense? Which one would you identify as being somebody who's connected, where there's greater harmony? Anybody?
I would say
A, you see. So how would you describe C? What would be the physical reality of somebody in C? What kind of a body would that person have where the vibrations are in this condition?
Perhaps it's someone that's very stressed out. Perhaps a person that's sick, has some sort of disease.
Excellent. What kind of breath would this person, what would be the pranic movement of this individual?
Probably a very shallow breath, very quickly.
What kind of mental state would this individual have?
Very stressed out, very quick thoughts, nervousness.
Now, if you understand, excellent, thank you very much for that. If you understand what the C represents about the internal atmosphere of that individual, including the body also, you see that because it is all interrelated, if you mess up on one level, you see automatically how it creates a mess in the other two levels as well. You can start anywhere. You mess up one level and it can start messing up the other levels of ourselves also, right? And as you mentioned that you see immediately that the breath is shorter. You see that the body is not comfortable. We see that the mind is not at peace. And therefore, the entire process of what kind of attitude would this individual have towards life?
He would probably not trust. It would be untrusting, very fearful, perhaps even like fatalistic. He wouldn't trust. He wouldn't trust his body first of all. And if you don't trust your body, then you wouldn't trust anybody else.
And how would this, so now these are models of different human beings. So what would be the kind of interaction with other bodies, other people? As you mentioned, yes, there would be. But imagine if you got many of these put together, what would happen to that environment, to that community, to that family?
Perhaps everybody would be defensive. Everybody would be, well, what's happening in the world now?
Chaotic.
Unpredictable, erratic.
Exactly. So you see immediately that the state of mind, the state of emotions, because the breath is very closely connected to emotions, and you see that the state of the body, none of them is at ease. And therefore, this system is really a system of dis-ease, of vibratory and factual dis-ease at various levels. When in the Gita they talk of this, they also talk of it as the three qualities of human beings. And the guna, the word guna, if you've heard of it. So it talks of the guna of the sattva, one who is in this aligned, peaceful way. The second one is known as rajas, where, because if this is dis-ease, the rajas is a little more at ease, but it's still, there's a lot of dynamism that is taking place. So this would be rajas. So I'll just write that out for you. So this would be sattva. This would be rajas. And this would be tamas. Someone who is in darkness, at a level of a vibratory darkness. And the whole objective of yoga is how do you go from this diseased level to a level of greater ease? How do we move from being in a state of discomfort, a state of disjointedness with oneself and with one's environment, to a state of a greater connectivity and alignment within and without? Right? Because the moment we have alignments, you see that there is a resonance with something greater. The moment there is a resonance with something greater, we find the common connection across the different types of individuals as well. Maybe these levels are connected much more. Yeah. You see, those at that level, it's all connected. And we are also connected at this level. So yoga, one of the things that comes in with yoga is the role that every individual plays in determining the overall reality as well. You see, because we are all at that vibratory level, we are all interconnected. Huh? So a yogi works or recognizes the importance of this state of harmony, the need for this harmony, because the more harmonized we are in ourselves, allows our environment to find harmonies. It's like if there is a lot of darkness, you see, if there are multiple seas, then we are in a state of a lot of darknesses. In a state of darkness, all you need to do is to bring in a little bit of light. And because of the alignments of vibrations, is one that brings in a little bit of light. But the big question that comes in, and therefore we go from disease to ease, from tamas to sattva. How do we go about it? We can start at any level. There is the level of the body. So just stretching out the body can help to straighten out at a physical level. And that is what Hatha Yoga is all about. At the level of the emotions, we have the level of bhakti where the heart just opens up and is ready to give without getting into transactions. If that person does this, then I will do that. You know, it's a free opening of the heart, because that's who we are. So at some level. So we allow the heart to open up, and that's Bhakti Yoga. And then there is the level of the mind, which just we understand, we get more clarity at a mental level. And you have the Jnana Yoga. Then our speech, our actions, everything that we do becomes more aligned and harmonious. That is Karma Yoga, the yoga of actions. And then you have the level of, and in this reality, where does mantra fit in? So when we do the mantra, it's like in this, why mantra? Because mantra is really at the level of the subtle reality of sounds and vibration. So in this noise, when we introduce a calm vibration, it forces the rest of the vibrations to start resonating with it. And just the very fact of resonating with a conscious sound can help us move towards a greater state of calm and peace within us. So when we look at this entire connected reality at our vibratory level, we start recognizing first and foremost that as a yogi, it becomes imperative for us to find these alignments between what I think, what I say, what I do, who I am. And this can also be understood in a different context of a system. So supposing you look at this, let's say this is a system that is there. I make this whole thing one system where you can have ABC kind of levels within you. Every system has inputs, all right? So this system has different inputs. What is giving us inputs into our system? If you look at yourself as a system, now I'm taking all of this as one system, where the individual has times when they are peaceful, the individual has times when they're a little more disturbed, the individual has times when they're much more disturbed. But it's all happening inside one person right now. What is it that causes these disturbances? What are the inputs that can trouble the system?
Cultural notions.
Cultural notions, yes. What is the gateway into our space? Because we talked of sukha, which is excellent space. When there is excellent space outside, it's easier to find easier, not necessary, but easier to find excellent space inside. But when you have excellent, in order to have excellent space, the inputs that are there, if they are noisy, if they are violent, so what is it that is allowing the external world to enter our inner space?
Our senses.
Our senses, brilliant. So the doors to our inner space are our senses. So if the senses are giving out to, let's say, unpleasant things, to noisy structures, we cannot imagine that I'm constantly looking at violence and I'm going to be a very peaceful person. Or I'm listening to things that are very violent and I'm going to suddenly become a peaceful person. I cannot imagine that I'm going to, like taste things that are, very hot or spicy or not good and suddenly feel very nice, or touch things that are not pleasant and feel good. So the senses play a very important role in determining the quality of that inner space of the individual. And therefore, the very first definition of yoga says, tam yogamiti manyante sthiram indriya dharanam. So what is yoga? I will just stop this sharing here and share with you another screen which has the so what is this other level of, or what is this definition of yoga? So it says, what is yoga? It says that, I'll show you the Sanskrit as well. So it says tam yogamiti manyante sthiram indriya dharanam. This is from the Katha Upanishad, one of the early texts. And what does it say? It says that that is yoga when the senses are held firmly. If the senses are not all the time going to the world outside and you can hold your senses, that practice is yoga. Because the senses distract, and when the senses turn towards something that is more peaceful within, then we can find a state of yoga. The second definition of yoga is the definition that has to do with the drawing that we saw here. One of the reasons, so when there are disturbing things that come in through our senses, we also realize that that which registers it is the mind. We can be, all of us listen to different things, but the mind captures it in different ways. So when the movements of the mind are stilled, then we can experience yoga. And that's the definition of Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra, where he says, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. So yoga is the stoppage of the movements of the mind. So when we go from C to A, that's when we see that the mind is no longer making its own noise. It is allowing itself to be influenced by something that is higher, greater, that knows how it should be in harmony with itself and with its environment. So the second definition of yoga is yoga chitta vritti nirodha. The first definition had to do with the input level. The second definition has to do with the processing level. How do we process the inputs of the universe into ourselves? We process it by maintaining a certain calmness of reactions. And that's where things like meditation, not jumping into judgments, all these spontaneous, voluntary, or rather involuntary ways of being play a role in determining the quality of our mind space. So even if something comes and we are not reactive to that, we are in a state where we can decide how do I want to respond to reality rather than react to it. So a yogi is one who finds that balance, or rather is in control of how that person is responding to the inputs of the world. And finally, the third level in any case is the output. So there is an input, there is a processing, and there is an output of every system. So what is the output of somebody who is, let's say if the inner atmosphere now is in C, the output will be somebody, what kind of thoughts would that person have? What kind of speech would that person have? What kind of actions would the person do? Again, it's an invitation to reply. So if somebody is in C, what kind of thoughts would that person have? Very quickly, we've touched upon it.
Not very structured, not very clear.
Yes, excellent. What kind of speech would that person have?
More kind, compassionate.
No, in C, we're talking of C.
Oh, C, okay, Thomas.
What kind of speech would such a person have?
Probably very fast.
Fast, yes.
Negative.
How clear would it be?
Disjointed, unconnected, perhaps a little violent, aggressive.
Sort of distorted, I think. It's
excellent. What kind of
distorted?
Yeah, what kind of actions would the person have?
Probably aggressive.
In terms of work, if you're doing a work, what kind of work would that work be?
Not organized, not planned, not logical.
Excellent.
And thinking also could be rational. Yeah.
Excellent. So we see
rational.
Excellent, excellent. So we see that we have the input through the senses. We have the input through the senses, which play a role also in influencing the quality of the inner space. The more we are conscious, we become conscious of the condition of the mind, we start taking a little more responsibility of how we are processing our reality. And finally, we are giving and on what kind of outputs we are doing. It will determine how that individual's output towards life also is. So we see that there is second, my computer's jumped. All right, that there is an output at the level of the thoughts, at the level of speech, and at the level of action. And each of A, B, C, which is determining the quality of the inner space, will have a different kind of an output in the way of being. Right? So I hope all of this is a little clear. The last definition, so we talked of one definition of yoga which talked about the senses. We talked of another definition of yoga that talked about the processing that happens. And the third definition from the Gita is the definition of what kind of, if you are a yogi, if you're in A, you're connected, the output will be, what kind of action would this person do?
Equanimous, sthita prajna.
Exactly. So there would be an equanimous, there would be also the kind of, if you had to actually work with something, what kind of work quality would you have?
Nothing but dedication without any expectation.
Yes. And no, in terms of actual quality, what kind of product, what if you had to produce something, what kind of quality would be produced?
Be something very refined.
Excellent. So the third definition from the Gita is yoga karmasu kaushalam. So what is yoga? Yoga is perfection in works. So in order to achieve, so you see that each of these definitions is again interconnected. You cannot have one if the second is not in place, if the first is not in place. You cannot have the first if the second, and or if you have the first, then the second and third will already automatically fall in place. So the entire system is multi-layered, and that's what these are all the aspects that a yogi starts becoming conscious of. One cannot call oneself a yogi if one is just going on a mat a few hours and just stretching and saying, okay, now I'm feeling good, and then you come and start screaming at everybody in the house. The kind of work that you do is not a good quality of work. None of this fits. So if one uses the term yogi, it comes with a lot of responsibility at various levels. The first and the most important responsibility is the recognition of the importance of the nature of one's inner atmosphere. Because the quality of what one is inside is directly having an impact on the quality of what happens around that individual. So when we use the term yogi, which doesn't really necessarily mean one who is in the process, the term yogi means one who is in yoga, one who possesses union, one who possesses dissolution. And if one who possesses all of that, that individual's attitude towards the world is a very, very different ballgame. So I would like to conclude here. I mean, I'm saying conclude, it's going to be a little stretched conclusion, but I'd like to now go back to a text which is telling us what really happens to a yogi. What we've done so far is falling back on our own experiences, just looking at these models, understanding the things. We have tried to understand what could be certain traits of a yogi, certain ways of being of a yogi, certain ways of interaction of a yogi, the inner quality of a yogi. What I'd like to now share with you is from the Gita, and what Katyayani ji also mentioned about the notion of the sthita prajna, one whose intelligence is established in themselves. How does such a person behave? How does such a person talk? How does such a person walk? So I'd like to share these verses from the Gita with you, because that has a different level of presentation from the greatest of yogis, who is none other than Sri Krishna. He's known as the Yogi Raja, the Yogeshwara Krishna. And that means the Lord, the master of yoga. I'll just share the screen with you. All of you are familiar with the context of the Gita, where it's this battlefield, and Arjuna, this warrior, is facing the people whom he has to now fight with and kill, and they're all his own people. So he's put into this tremendous turmoil and conflict. He says, but why? Just for a piece of land, is it really worth it? And then Krishna tries to explain to him the larger perspective of things. So first and foremost, what Krishna teaches us as a counselor is that when you are stuck in a problem, if you try to address that problem at the same level, it is impossible. In order to address any issue, you have to step up, you have to go a level higher, get a greater perspective of it, and then one is in a better position to take decisions about that situation. It's like if you want to stop a battle, you can be in the middle of the battlefield, and yes, you have a certain idea, but if you go up a little bit on a mountain, you can see the movements of the battle happening in a manner that can allow you to intervene in more effective manners. So he says he goes up, and this is what, so Arjuna, Krishna is telling him things about, you should, finally, we are this greater truth. So in the quantum lens, for example, and this is a difficult question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts before I start addressing it from a textual point of view. So if you are at a quantum lens, if you have that, if you are permanently given the quantum yogi lens, let's say, what would experiences like death and birth really mean? How would you understand death?
There is no such thing as death once you are there. So you are always what is the death happens only to the body, right? So the Atma is never dead. So the concept of death is it changes as you go deeper into meditation.
Excellent.
And you don't see.
I would say that at that level is somehow a dissolution of those particles and a union of, and birth will be a union of those particles. I mean, it's just matter, like uniting and disuniting. I mean, that's what I will think.
All right. Anybody else? Anybody else would like to say anything on that?
Just probably some different process of transition. It wouldn't really be any, from my perspective, any form of rupture, just some sort of transition or, you know, very unique process, but nothing else.
Isn't that seeing oneness with the ultimate, being one with, that's the death to them, right? It's just being one with God, one with Paramatma. Is that the concept? Isn't that the concept of the yogis?
There are possibly many ways of explaining this, but in the Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna that, you know, you believe that there is something that's happening, but actually the truth, the deeper truth of us is much greater. So you have to perform your action because there is a greater truth that needs to be established. And for that you have to act. But then Arjuna is still very confused and not convinced. So in the second chapter, he's asking Krishna. So he says, you know, he says that you're talking of somebody who's able to act with this calm mind, do what has to be done. So he says, how does, this is the Sanskrit verse, he says, Sthita prajnasya ka bhasha, samadhisthasya keshava, sthitadihi kim prabhasheta, kim asita vrajeta kim. So he says, Arjuna, he says, what is the sign of a man in samadhi? And that's what the Yoga Sutra is really taking us towards. He says, whose intelligence is firmly fixed in wisdom. How does the sage of settled understanding speak? How does he sit? How does he walk? You know, what happens to somebody who is really in yoga? And then to this, Krishna starts answering. And the first thing he says, I will not read the Sanskrit in everyone because I think it will become too much. But he says, when a man expels, O Partha, all desires from his mind. So he says, Prajahati yada kaman. The more we have desires, when you say I have a desire, it implies that we live in a state of lack. A desire is when I don't have something. And if you think of the quantum, so he says, one who experiences lack will necessarily not be in a state of conscious, you know, in a state of quietness. So he says, O Partha, a man who gives up all desires from the mind and is satisfied in himself and by himself, then he is called of stable intelligence. So one who has that state of I am everything at some point will lose a sense of desires. Then he says, he goes on. He says, Dukkheshu anudvigna manaha, Sukheshu vigata sprihaha, Vitaraga bhayakrodha stitadhir munir uchyate. So what happens to this person who is in a state of union? He says, he whose mind is undisturbed in the midst of sorrows and amid pleasures is free from desire, from whom liking and fear and wrath or anger have passed away. This is a person who has a settled understanding. And then he says, Yah sarvatra nabhisneha tat prapya shubhashubham nabhinandati nadveshti tasya prajna pratishtita. So he says, who in all things is without affection though visited by this good or that evil, and neither hates nor rejoices. His intelligence sits firmly founded in wisdom. So basically, one who it has a state of who's not disturbed by what comes around. And we see that through that example of the system. It doesn't matter what comes from outside, you have the freedom, one has the freedom to respond to it at any given time. And he says, he gives an example. He says, Yada samharate chayam kurmunganiva sarvashaha indriyani indriyarthebhya tasya prajna pratishtita. So this is going back to that first definition. He says, one who draws away the senses from the objects of the senses, of sense. As a tortoise draws in his limbs into the shell, his intelligence sits firmly founded in wisdom. Sthita prajna. So this is that first definition. When we know how to hold our senses, when the senses are not seeing one thing and running after it. So when we are able to do that, then we have greater freedom of responses again. He says, Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehinaha rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. So when the question that comes up very logically is that how can one prevent the senses from going outwards? What is the mechanism to achieve the state of inner calm? So he says that you can only let go something when you have something that is more valuable inside. So when your focus is turned towards something that is more true, more lasting, more blissful, then very naturally your taste for anything that is less than that will go away. So he says, if one abstains from food, the objects of senses cease to affect, but the affection itself of the sense, the rasa remains. The rasa also ceases when the supreme is seen. So when we can connect to the inner light in that sense, then we are no longer carried away. And then he says, Yatato hyapi kaunteya purushasya vipashchita indriyani pramathini haranti prasabham manaha. So it's very reassuring. He says that even the mind of the wise man who labors for perfection, even such a mind is carried away by the vehement insistence of the senses, O son of Kunti. So it's not an easy thing. Basically, Krishna is reassuring. He's saying that it's not an easy task to stop the mind from getting carried away from everything. So it's a little work, it's a little abhyasa that you have to keep trying, but it's possible. And then he says, Tani sarvani sanyamya yukta asita matparaha vashehi yasya indriyani tasya prajna pratishtita. He says, having brought all the senses under control, he must sit firmly in yoga, wholly given up to me, for whose senses are mastered. Of him the intelligence is firmly established. So the less one is carried away by the senses. And I will just say this and then let me just see. So he says, what happens if you allow yourself to get carried away? He says, Dhya, and this is, I think, a very important secret of Yogitude. And that therefore I like to present it. To understand the sequence of things. Sangat sanjayate kamaha. When you get attached, you start desiring it. Kamat krodho vijayate. When you don't get what you desire, you start getting angry. I will just show the translation. Okay, you start getting angry. And then he says, Krodhad bhavati sammoho. When you get angry, then your mind starts getting into C. It starts getting all confused. Sammohat smriti vibhramaha. When it's all in delusion, then your facts get spoiled. Smriti bhramsha buddhi nasha. If your memory is corrupted, then the basis on which you will act is also corrupted. Your intelligence is corrupted. There is a virus in the programming, basically. And smriti bhramsha buddhi nasha. That intelligence is not functioning well. Buddhi nashat pranashyati. if there is a virus that has gone so deep into your system, then the system is pretty much damaged. All right. But where does it start? So that's just the whole thing. But where does it start? It starts with what are you going on thinking of? If you that will pull you out, that will get you into that trap, then this is what is to be expected. So that's why in the yoga tradition, they always say that keep the company of people who are greater than you, who are better than you, who will uplift you. So that is a very important practical requirement on the way to becoming a yogi. And then he says, what happens? So therefore we saw and this is all the raga, dvesha in the Yoga Sutra. They're all the kleshas, they're all the things that don't allow the mind to be free. So he says, raga, dvesha, vimuktaistu, vishayan indriyaicharan, atma vashyair vidheyatma, prasadam adhigachati. So one who is full of likes and dislikes. How do these strong likes and dislikes comes? When one gets attached to objects. I like this object, I don't like this object. The more strong these are, the more you will lose the peace of your own being. So it is by ranging over the objects with the senses, but with senses subject to the self, freed from liking and disliking, that one gets into a larger and sweet clearness of soul and temperament. It says, Prasade sarva dukkhanam hani rasyopajayate prasanna chetaso hyashvu buddhi paryavatishtate. So he says that by and large, the large and sweet clearness of soul and temperament, passion and grief find no place. So once you find that peace, then there will be no place for extreme emotions. So we'll come to the samatvam yoga uchyate. There is a state of quiet no matter what is happening to the world around you. Because the source of that sukha is not outside. That excellent space is created within the individual and not outside the individual. The intelligence of such a man is rapidly established in a proper seat. And this is almost now coming to a close. Then he says, Nasti buddhir ayuktasya nachayuktasya bhavana nacha bhavayata shantihi ashantasya kutasukham. So he says, for one who is not in yoga, there is no intelligence, no concentration of thought. For him, without that concentration, there is no peace. And for the unpeaceful, how can there be happiness? So that inner space, when that is troubled, then there cannot be good space, and therefore one cannot be happy. Indriyanam hi charatam yan mano nu vidhiyate tadasya harati prajñam vayur navam ivamsi. So he says, such is the roving of the senses. Again, going back. So this importance of the inputs, what are the inputs? He says, such of the roving senses of as the mind follows, that carries away the intelligence, just as the winds carry away a ship on the sea. So if you want to be master of the ship that you want to lead, then you have to stick to the, not allow the winds of external world to influence the mind through the senses. And he said that tasmad yasya mahabaho nigrihitani sarvashaha indriyanindriyarthebhyaha tasya prajña pratishtita. So what is he saying? He says, therefore, O mighty armed one, who has utterly restrained the excitement of the senses by their objects, his intelligence sits firmly founded in calm self-knowledge. Ya nisha sarva bhutanam tasyam jagarti sanyami yasyam jagarti bhutani sa nisha pashyato munehe. So he says, the higher being which is to all creatures a night is to the self-mastering sage his waking, his luminous day of true being, knowledge and power. The life of dualities which is to them their waking, their day, their consciousness, their bright condition of activity, is night, a troubled sleep and the darkness of the soul to the sage who sees. So basically what they're saying is that what everybody thinks is awakened, So typically in today's world, when you think, okay, I'm totally alive, my senses are all, excited and I'm completely alive. Such is considered a night for one who is a yogi. Because you know that the more the senses are excited, the less one is connected within. The less one is, and for, you know, when for somebody who is calm and all, everybody else think what a dull person this individual is. It's like a night for everybody else. So this change starts taking place. This shift of what is day and what is night really. Then apurya achala pratishtham samudramapa pravishanti yadvat tadvat kama yam pravishanti sarve sashanti mapnoti na kama kami. So it says that he attains peace, into whom all desires enter as waters into the sea, an ocean of wide being and consciousness, which is ever being filled, yet ever motionless. Not he who, like troubled and muddy waters, is disturbed by every little inrush of desire. Again, this whole thing of sense objects, sense, where is our poise? That Atman yevatmanatushtaha, one who's content in himself by himself. So the inner atmosphere, I think, vihaya kaman yah sarvan pumans charati nisprihaha nirmamo nirahankaraha sashantim atigachati. So he says, who abandons all desires and lives and acts free from longing, who has no sense of I or mine, just like in the quantum lens. Doesn't make sense to say this is my house, this is my thing. At that quantum level, none of that makes sense. Who has extinguished his individual ego in the one and lives in that unity, he attains to that great peace. It says, Esha Brahmi Sthiti Partha Nainam Prapya Vimuhyati Sthitva Syamanta Kaleti Brahma Nirvanam Richati. So he says that this word Brahma is very important. And that's in Vedanta, in one of the philosophies, is what we're aspiring for. What is Brahma? Brahma is this expanded state of being, that quantum state of being. So he says, one who finds himself, this Brahmi Sthitihi, this state of a firm standing in the Brahman, this expanded consciousness, O son of Pritha, O Arjuna, having attained thereto, one is not bewildered. Once an individual understands that lens of the quantum world, if you live in that lens, for them, there is no confusion. Fixed in that status at his end, one can attain to extinction in the Brahman, that dissolution. One is not bound by the limitations of who we think we are and act, or what anybody else is. So that is the final verse here. So just to close here with this Yogitude thing, I'll talk of a reality which is very different from any of this yoga thing that we've spoken of, but someone who arrives at a very similar conclusion. There is a book by a psychologist called Viktor Frankl. So Viktor Frankl was a psychologist who survived 4 concentration camps. And you can understand the kind of turmoil, the external input of turmoil that a concentration camp can create in any individual. So he survived 4 concentration camps, and he was observing what happens to human nature under the worst conditions, the most inhuman conditions. And he says, circumstance can take away from an individual all of his freedoms, but the last. And that is to choose his attitude in any given circumstance. So the freedom of the choice of one's attitude in any given circumstance is the attitude of the yogi. The recognition of that freedom. And to close this talk on Yogitude, so I've tried to take you through different ways of understanding what it means to be a yogi. What are certain steps in order to achieve that state of being in yoga? And when one achieves the state of yogihood, or when one achieves the state of being a yogi, one of the first liberations that one experiences is this freedom of choosing one's attitude in any given circumstance. So, thank you very much.
Well, Thank you very much, Anuradha. I mean, I'm a bit speechless, after this presentation, because it's not only what you have said and the conclusion you have reached, but I think what's very beautiful in this presentation, and I'm very glad it's recorded, is the way you've been circling around something that is quite abstract and quite difficult to grasp, and a very ancient knowledge, but you are presenting it through different angles, some that seems very simple, like looking at your hands, another one that is a series of drawing that look like a child scribble, but it's at the end very, very complex, and then also bringing us back to the text, so that after having gone through those meanderings, we can see that the text at the end of the day is not that complicated and that imposing as it seems. So I have to really say that the methodology is as beautiful as the content, and I thank you very much. I'll just read some of the comments and ask people to prepare their questions if they have any. So while I'm reading, people, please, you're free to think of any questions you have to Anuradha about the lecture, but also about her journey, about what she does, where does she teach, etc., etc. So I'll read from Katyayani Surya Devara. Excellent, insightful analysis of what it is like being a yogi and the stepping stones to see oneself experience that ultimate bliss. Thank you. Ambassador Abagani wonderfully presented the deep wisdom of yoga. Congratulations to the speaker and Embassy of Dominican Republic for arranging this session. Julie Wellish, who is a yoga teacher in Dominican Republic and practitioner, says, excellent conference. Thank you. Eileen Beato says, thank you also. Linel Hernandez, thank you so much. Leslie Cabrera, excellent, thank you. There are little hearts. Someone is saying of great help, and thank you again. So now I think if anyone has questions, comment, I think we have a little bit of time, though it's late in Dominican Republic, but I think it's worth that we have Anuradha here and asking her. Or any comments?
Well, Anuradha, there was a moment when you were speaking and you were about to say something, but then the communication cut off, and it was very typical of getting some insight. You said part of Yogitude, or what I consider very important about Yogitude, is this, and then we had no sound. And,
oh no!
It was very archetypical.
So at what time did that happen?
It was when you were reading the Gita. Okay. I couldn't remember the verse, but maybe you remember the moment.
Okay.
And if you remember what exactly that happened, I would appreciate if you could go back to that. And also, you say that yogi means to be able to choose your attitude at any given situation. But we also have a relationship of always choosing a very calm, let's say, attitude toward any relationship when it comes to being like somebody who's like, let's call it spiritually enlightened or yogi, or right? But what if you choose violence? What does that mean then?
This is a fascinating topic, but honestly, it's a whole different topic for another talk some other time. I'm not self-inviting, but I'm just saying that there is this whole discussion about violence. I mean, and I'm going to take the risk. We tend to talk of non-violence, ahimsa, as an absolute virtue in itself. if that was what the Indian tradition really believed in, I mean, if that was what, I won't say believed in, but if that was one of the ways of seeing life, then a text like the Gita would not have happened. Because the Gita is taking place in a battlefield. A war has to take place. So you see, there is no option there at that particular moment. Circumstantially, there is a war that is taking place, and the reason for that war is because one side has not been just. Whereas another side is, the story typically happens because of a fight over a kingdom, where one side says, we will give you after you come back, we will give you your kingdom if you stay in the forest for so long. And when they come back, this is forget it. So they are unfair, there is injustice. And this battle is happening because there is no other way. They try negotiation, everything, and the battle is happening. So it's a very tricky, this is a very tricky statement to talk about in today's context as well, because there is a war that's going on. Who is just, who is unjust, what is really happening? These are all very, very tricky very tricky realities. While, we talk of that Brahma state of oneness and all that, but these are daily challenges that all of us encounter. I can push it to we're pushing it to an extreme at a national level, but these challenges are also there at personal levels. So if you are confronted with a state of somebody, let's say, if somebody is holding a gun at somebody's head, maybe at your head, and you have a gun, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, no, non-violence is the greatest of virtues? You'll be dead. Or do you say that I have to shoot, otherwise I will be dead? You, of course, if there is any other way, the first option is, of course, the non-violent way of trying to address a situation. So, and that has to be taken to its ultimate level of attempt. But if a circumstance requires that there has to be an action. So the Gita is really about at what level do you act and how do you do that action. So there are many, that's why I said it's a very tricky, it's a very sensitive point that you've raised, because it can lead to a lot of there's a lot of scope for misunderstanding and abuse of this reality. One can really abuse it. One can fool oneself that I'm acting in the best interest of somebody and therefore acting violently. So it's a very easy, avenue for fooling oneself. But one has to know that if in a place one has to stand up and maybe even take a stand that might not be the most compassionate, it could require a certain greater response. I have a few friends who talk about ahimsa as the greatest value. In fact, it's said in the text itself. Different texts talk of ahimsa paramo dharmaha. So that is the greatest of virtue, to be non-violent even if there is violence coming at you. And this is something that the mother from the Sri Aurobindo ashram, she says that if there is an animal, let's say, that's coming with aggression, and our response is perfect serenity, the violence in that, or that aggression in that creature, will be stilled. So the quality of one's internal vibration is very, very important in determining the nature of the quality of the environment around us. So in terms of vibrations, we are receiving beings and we are transmitting beings. And in that context, yes, the first and most important thing is to practice non-reaction, and therefore to practice non-violence, because then you are in a state of absolute quiet. But at what level can that there is action required? So I push my friends sometimes with a very difficult situation. I say, supposing you've got 2 children, and I'm going to share it because it is an extreme, and it's in that extreme thing that whether these virtues hold or don't hold. It's very easy to talk of non-violence when there is no non-violent situation. That's a very easy thing to do. How non-violent are we in the midst of a violent situation? For example, again, the war. The war is going on now. how violent or non-violent are we in the way we encounter this reality? Very important. I mean, there are no simple answers, so I will not even attempt them. All right. But the extreme situation that I put people in, I said, supposing you've got children, and you please excuse me for this very harsh example. All right. Supposing you've got 2 children, you've got an elder one and a younger one, and the elder one for some reason has gone, something has gone, there's a wiring problem, and has become very negative, has become a bad person, and is holding the gun to your younger one's head. And you have tried everything to, bring the situation to normalcy. There is no other option. The only way you can stop that happening is to shoot. Will you act or will you not act? If you don't act, that younger one will be killed. If you act, justice will be done, because the younger one was innocent. This one was correct. Will you pull the trigger or not pull the trigger? So very often the problem of, it's my child, so I will try as much as possible to avoid a violent situation. What if it is somebody who's not connected to you? The trigger will be pulled much more easily. So there is this minus, not minus, violence, non-violence. We tend to put them as very easy binaries, but they are not. And but having said all of that, and then therefore the action comes, what is the attitude in which one can commit? Maybe what is the attitude in which, if there is a need for a violent intervention, what is the attitude in which that any action against injustice needs to be taken? Keeping in mind, yes, we are all one consciousness, but everybody is not acting. The challenge really comes about between this philosophy of being a yogi and the life of a yogi. The challenge is this gap between the underlying unity and the reality of differences. How do we deal with that on a day-to-day basis? And it's at that point that it comes back to the individual to introspect and be conscious, have that sincerity of what is my attitude? Am I doing it because my inner atmosphere is turbulent? It's turbulent outside, I am turbulent, I act. Then it's not a yogi attitude. But if there is a need and because if I don't act at that point, I promote violence. If there are 2 people who are, let's say, fighting, let's not even get it into an extreme situation of having to kill 2 people who are fighting. And the only way you can stop is by being aggressive with one a little bit, like, stop it, you just have to go and hold. You can say that, no, I'm a peaceful person, I will not interfere. Is that really the best thing? What if something happens then? Or would you say that with very calm, you go and hold that person, maybe even shake that person and say, stop it. It will look aggressive because you've gone and held. Maybe you need to push that person aside so that that person doesn't do anything. Maybe even that is required. Maybe you need to punch that person. But what is the attitude in which you're doing it? So what the Gita really tells Arjuna at the end, when Krishna is telling, he says, the more you are able to be still in yourself and you do something because that is the best thing to be done at that point, so that the reality doesn't get into a worse situation. But you can only do that when you are able to connect to the greater perspective. You cannot connect to that when you are in our little, I think this is good, I think that is bad. Then we've lost it. So the whole thing of this need to have the wisdom of what is the right thing, what is the wrong thing. This wisdom is one of those greatest features of Yogitude. To know. So it's, like I said, it's a very tricky question, but I think I'm always very hesitant to get into the simplistic answer of yes, non-violence is the only thing, because I think it needs a lot more thought, careful thought.
Thank you, Anuradha. There is a less tricky question, and which connects with what you were saying about day-to-day life. I mean, how to deal with situations. And Linel Hernandez is asking, in your day-to-day life, when faced with a problem or confrontation, so we're back at this idea, you know, of violence, you know, in a way, how do you anchor yourself in equanimity? Do you use breath, or do you go to another tool? I mean, what concretely, how do you in your life, you know, makes all this operational, let's say?
All right. So I think it's the most important thing to recognize is the fact that normally we are acting out of a lot of turmoil. My sort of understanding more and more these days is the importance of the lenses we are using, and how filtered or colored is the lens we use to understand any situation. So if somebody is maybe angry with me, and I am responding with anger, then my lens is fully colored with an emotion. And especially if it's a person, then I have my own baggages of how I look at that individual. So one way of doing it, of course, is the slowing of the breath is the most easy tool, because it calms down everything else within yourself. The second is to also be able to recognize that if somebody is coming to me with a certain attitude, that individual is coming with their own limited package of who they are. Just because somebody is doing something to me is no reason why I have to respond with that equal emotion. So when one starts recognizing this distance, the fact of one's choice, that becomes a very helpful practice to know the best reaction at that time. So yeah, I think that is the way of achieving samatvam, is breath, of course, but also clarity of mind at that point. That why am I reacting? Am I reacting because I am out of control? In which case, you can be sure that what will come out will not be good for both. But if I am reacting with a state of understanding that I need to say something firmly or the person will not understand, but I am calm. So it's taking responsibility of this inner sukha, this inner space. How are we managing the inner contents of the contents of our inner space? That taking charge, that becoming master, that freedom of choice in whatever circumstance it may. So, and that's why the Buddha, he talks so much also of desires, and he talks about this thing of suffering. So this, when something is coming to me from outside, the big question is that normally our system is very osmotic with its environment. So things come and we are reacting, and things come and we are reacting. The point is, at what stage can I say that no matter what comes, I will choose what I put out? The more one can do that, one starts becoming master of one circumstance. Then one can choose one circumstance. Because now if somebody is trying to make me really angry, and I can stay okay, calm, then beyond a point, that, what that person was intending with the anger loses its force. And I think this is something very important to also recognize, that if somebody is throwing poison at us, or if somebody is throwing negative vibes, the more we respond to that at that same level, we are amplifying that frequency. So if you want to counter, if you want to be on top of the situation, you have to counter it with the opposite reaction. So if somebody is really angry at you, you have to be like really calm. Because then you're not feeding that energy that is coming. And when you are calm, this is something that is an experience, because when you're calm, then suddenly you can see other possibilities. Suddenly you will understand why that person is so angry. because there is also that genuine love and compassion that comes out of it. When you can be really calm, you understand that everybody goes through their own situations. To whatever extent possible. I mean, we are all work in progress. That's the good news. So never to be too harsh or judgmental on oneself also. But to be aware, not to know. If you've faltered, to acknowledge, yes, I missed it this time. I think that is an important thing. I hope I answered your question.
I think you answered, and I don't know if there are no more questions. I think that's a good conclusion to know that we are all a work in progress.
Yes,
that's a good line to finish, you know, and to take away, because it gives us hope. It gives hope to all of us. So if there are no more, yes, Anuradha?
Yes. No, I will just possibly just wrap it up with one verse again from the Gita, and then you can close. But if you allow me to just wrap it up with one verse, where he says, you know, in the 6th chapter, he says, Jnanibhyo bhimatodhikaha. No, Jnanibhyo bhimatodhikaha. Karmibhyashchadhiko yogi. Tasmad yogi bhavarjuna. So he's telling him, therefore be a yogi. And what is he saying? He says, a yogi is superior to the tapasvi. Somebody who's just doing a lot of, you know, strong practices and all, doing tapa. You know, a yogi is greater than such a person. And he's also greater to the jnani. I know a lot of things and all that. It's, you know, many of us unfortunately think that because I know, I also do. And that's one of the big challenges of the yoga world. Because the brain tricks itself. The brain doesn't know the difference between I know and I do. So very often one thinks, you know, that just because I am practicing yoga and all, I have become a great being. It's not necessary. And that's where I come, you know, we come back to this thing that we are all work in progress. So just because I know does not equal to I am. And yogi is one who is, not one who knows, not one who is trying by tapasya. He says even superior to the karmi, one who's doing a lot of rituals and all. So that's another, sometimes, you know, even with the yoga world, we get stuck to rituals. And we think that because we are doing rituals, we are greater than who we are. So even rituals don't really make us a yogi. So he says that just doing rituals don't make you a yogi. Just knowing about things don't make you a yogi. Just thinking that I'm doing a very, very strong practices of tapasya, you know, I don't eat that many days. I don't. No, one can do all those things, but yet one might not be a yogi. So he says that therefore, as much as possible, connect and be connected to the larger thing. Then you are a yogi. But that was an important Sri Krishna saying it. And then very interestingly, he says at the end of the whole thing, you know, he gives him all this advice and all. At the end, he says, Yathechhasi tathakuru. So he's given him the entire thing, and then he gives him the full freedom. He says, I have given you the larger perspective of things, but finally you have to choose how you will act. Nobody can do any action for anybody else. That is also, I think, a very, very important thing to understand. Nobody can change anybody else. The only person we can change is ourselves. And maybe if we change ourselves and we act from a basis of greater wisdom, maybe the others around will get inspired and emulate it in their lives. And so there is a last shloka, but would you want me to end with a mantra now, or would you want to finish? Would you want to close and then?
Well, I think you can close with the mantra, and then Anna will request us all to pose for a picture together. I think that would be nice, so that we have a memento and a memory of this session. So Anuradha, you can proceed to the closing mantras, and then we'll all take the picture and wrap it up.
All right. So this mantra is a mantra of peace and well-being, which says Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha. So let everybody be happy or have excellent spaces. Sarve Santu Niramayaha. Let everybody be without disease. Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu. Let everybody see good things. Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavit. Let nobody have any kind of sorrow. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So this mantra, while it is a mantra of goodwill and peace and all, it is a mantra with a lot of responsibility. Because if you say let everybody be happy and you're all the time like that, then there is a disjointedness between speech and action. So you have to be happy as a responsibility. You have to have excellent spaces for others to have excellent spaces. Sarve Santu Niramayaha. For everybody to be healthy, one has to be healthy as a responsibility. And that is exactly what the corona has taught us, that if we want others to be healthy, we have to also keep ourselves fit and have a good immune system, eat well, sleep well, do things right. Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu. Let everybody see the good. But for everybody to see the good, everybody has to practice the good. And it starts with me. Let me practice the right things. Then at least people will see the good. And finally, let nobody have any sorrow. For that, I have to try not to create bad spaces or sorrow for anybody. And if everybody decides on that, I think we will live in a better world already. So I invite you to chant this along with me. I will say it and you repeat after. And unlike, the typical way of closing your eyes and all, I'll do it with dance and movement. And I invite you to join along. Okay. So when you're saying Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, you create these good space. So everybody be happy. Okay. Then, and you can't do happy like that. You have to feel that happiness at all levels. Sarve Santu Niramaya. So take away the crinkled vibrations of your body, of your aura. Sarve Bhadrani, good things, Pashyantu. And Ma Kaschit Dukkha Bhag. So don't let nobody should be sorrowful. Okay, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. We say Shanti at 3 levels because there is the physical world, there's the subtle world, and there is the spiritual. So you become an incarnation of peace when you invite it at 3 levels. Okay, so I'll chant it and you repeat after me. I'll say it slowly and I'll do the action so you can repeat. Okay, so Om Sarve
Om Sarve
Bhavantu
Bhavantu
Sukhinaha
Sukhinaha
Sarve
Sarve
Santu
Vantu
Niramayaha
Niramaya
Sarve
Sarve
Bhadrani
Hadrani
Pashyantu
Pashyantu
Ma Kaschid
Akaste
Dukkha Bhag
Kapag
Bhavit.
Bhavit.
Om together. We'll say Shanti 3 times. Om Shanti
Shanti Shanti.
Thank you very much, Anuradha. Dr. Anuradha is also very engaged in the teaching of Sanskrit in India, and she's been promoting, teaching, and there are a lot of resources also that I think she can share with the people who are interested about the teaching and the learning of Sanskrit. And the second area of expertise, which I find very interesting, is all that is related with the sound and yoga, sound and healing. And they are very interesting online lectures on that topic that are easily available in YouTube. So I'll also invite you to have a look at all of that. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Anna.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being there. Because if you're not sat for 2 hours, 2+ hours, nothing of this would have happened. So grateful.